First and foremost, our goal is to deliver high-fidelity graphical experiences.
Power, compatibility, and craftsmanship.
Full power! Stand build!
I'll say this for him, he's consistent.
Now it seems the rumour mill has kicked in again ahead of E3, with news of an early 2018 release of Sony's new console to defend its honour in this mighty power race. Now many sites and channels have reported this, and I wanted to get a video up covering the most likely plans and solution into the next generation and what it will take, and also give my opinion, as I happen to have a great deal of experience in many areas of corporate technology, as it is, after all, what I do for a living. Now you can also read more on this article on my website if you don't want to listen to me talk. So, is the PS5 due before the year is out, and just what will be inside it? Well, let's talk. Now I will kill the first question quickly. No. The PS5 will not launch in 2018. Now I'll also say that right now 2019 is possible, but most likely all plans pointing to 2020 for the launch. Now why do I say this? Well, even though the Xbox One X has sold better, if info is to be believed from launch and since, than the Pro, this was well within Sony's plans for it. It never intended it to be anything more than a retainer, or at best an attractor. Simply put, the aim for it was to stop the mid-gen ship jumping to PC that happens when console performance levels appear to have peaked around 3 years in. It was not a new gen or a huge leap over the standard model. In fact, they did all they could to fragment and disrupt the ecosystem as little as possible, and therefore the user base. A promise they made to keep all first-party titles as impressive and consistent before it launched, and something I will cover in far more detail with my God of War analysis coming up next week, just ahead of launch. Now, even though it was just over 2 times as powerful from the graphics side, other areas such as the CPU, the RAM, along with the casing and hard drive, it shifted much less, largely due to cost-saving measures and indicating the value of it for those that preferred better performance or sharper visuals. Now, some of this came at the detriment to the machine, as I covered in my review, and many analysed titles, as did the lack of a UHD Blu-ray player. Keeping it within that core $400 target was an overriding dependency, and was a double-edged sword that Microsoft pushed Sony onto with its S and later X models, swallowing more of that BOM cost to raise the gap. Now these things come as no surprise, but I think the most poignant mistake Sony made was that RAM allocation. They did the best they could within the scope, leaving it slightly hamstrung in allocation and bandwidth, with only a circa 10% and 20% increase respectively. Now the recent disruptive hike in PC component costs, such as RAM and certainly GPUs, have played into that, and the X's favour even more, mind, something I will address in detail with an upcoming article and build. Summary is, the PS4 Pro was a decent attempt to maintain the status quo and far from a runaway success. It likely achieved exactly what Sony intended, even if trying to please both sides limited its potential somewhat. Now, does this mean that Microsoft wanted to start a new gen early with the X then? Again, no. Their intention was the same, and as I covered back in 2015, before any of this was even public knowledge, my predictions were close, aside Sony and Microsoft obviously swapping sides, with Microsoft sitting out and waiting and Sony going first. It all played out as pretty much as expected. Now, Microsoft's plans needed to shake things up much more, and they could, due to the lagging position they found themselves in, largely due to misreading the market. Now, Phil Spencer is the front man and rightfully takes much of the credit for that, but I feel his biggest strength is allowing the relevant teams and knowledge room to breathe and deliver, rather than dictate from high, a common Microsoft tact in other divisions, although they are hardly the only company guilty of this. Now, the Xbox brand has leapfrogged in quality and market value since. With the X, they have not only delivered the best console on the market from a hardware perspective, but they've also delivered one of the best value gaming and media devices you can buy, period. Now, PC has been their shining glory, not only taking original Xbox and 360 games up to a native 4K, higher texture quality, faster loading, and much better frame rates, in some cases going from 30 to 60 FPS. This is something that the console space is really experiencing and enjoying for the first time. They have, for all intents and purposes, created a PC environment within a closed hardware model, and that is remarkable. In addition, they also took base X1 titles and improved those with similar boosts without the need for developer involvement. The shift to dynamic resolutions allowed the X to come out of the gate firing on all cylinders, boosting many titles to native 1080, cleaner filtering, and more consistent performance simply by dropping in the disc. The Witcher 3 was the pinnacle of that, as I covered exclusively at launch. Now, devs can and have still released specific patches to improve things further still. The boost mode on the Pro was a direct result of this impending change, and certainly helped raise the value of that machine as an upgrade. Again, I covered in depth when the update landed. Now, we stand within a single console generation with 2 or 2.2 distinct iterations of the hardware from either manufacturers, and as of now the X is taking all the limelight and that target it secured during the 360 era as its prize. It is the best place to play multi-platform titles currently. By how much and by how many is what I cover in detail. I'm obviously excluding PC here, depending on where your PC hardware sits. Now, this still does not mean that anything has changed. Forward compatibility is another subject Microsoft have broached, and this is not quite as simple as many articles and posts on forums seem to think. Now, having an x86-64 CPU does not magically make all software compatible, contrary to what you may have read or heard. It certainly makes it simpler than going from PPC to x86, as we saw prior, or indeed with the PS3 cell to PS4, but not straightforward. The abridged version is CPUs have native instruction sets, be they a CISC or a RISC-based design. The pipeline and how they handle these instructions differs from generation to generation, along with other things like cache and everything else. Now, GPUs also share similar problems. Models and generations can add or remove instructions, which will again affect how or even if they will support functions as expected. PC has abstraction through various API layers and operating systems that manage much of this away from the software developers. These are the things like DirectX, Vulkan, OpenGL, and even the AMD and NVIDIA drivers. Now, this reduces the direct control you have over the hardware at the benefit of allowing software to run across multiple configs and generations with minimal issues, but not free from them, remember. This is why you end up getting driver updates and patches. You would be amazed how much work and control sits inside those GPU drivers. Now, consoles have a similar approach. The days of the to-the-metal coding are long gone, and they have not just disappeared this generation either. But with the closed fixed function design of consoles and the closed development environment, much more of the hardware is exposed to the developers, along with the vital profiling tools. Now, these cannot be underestimated. Both PS4, X Pro and X1 all have abstraction of the CPU, the memory, the GPU and all other features of the hardware, just like PC. The difference being transparency is higher and code bases can be tailored to best suit each inherent benefit. Obviously, first party will always make the best use of this. My point, well, without this, the wonderful features we are experiencing with the X and the One X would not be remotely possible. This man in the middle enables the incredible work from the BC team to happen. Yes, they have added hardware features to assist with this, but the core function would be impossible if games were still coded to direct assembly like the Mega Drive, SNES, or even some Saturn and PS1 titles. The same goes for the Pro. Boost mode needed to be safe and effectively played within those limits to offer an increase in performance to each title that is oblivious to the application itself. And all those titles made years before the Pro was a twinkle in Sony's eye all work through this abstraction. Developers now ship update patches or core binaries that natively support the extra features and hardware of the newer machines. The operating system calls simply inquire what hardware it will run on, and this is presented with the relevant code to best support it, defaulting to the compatible mode at worst case to allow the complete libraries to play. Older generation BCs such as the X360, the X, or even the PS1, 2 or 3 would obviously require a more involved emulation method, but still fundamentally this is abstraction in play and is the biggest benefit of making software hardware agnostic. Now, one thing has now been made certain from all of this. Playing games from this generation onwards will be supported on both sides going forward. The only question is for how many of them. The next console, like the X and the Pro before them, will allow you to play the entire library at worst with no changes and at best enhanced in all areas. And you have the environment I've just described to thank for that. Obviously, in addition to the software and hardware team's development skills. Now, allowing all future titles to support your X1 or PS4 is not so simple. It will happen at the start for sure, cross-gen titles always do, but I think Microsoft's promise of forward compatibility will be something they can only support for so long. Even the PC at some point reaches a cutoff for new titles that force upgrades. Those minimum requirements may be slightly overzealous at times, but they are a real thing, and this will happen at some point once we get into the new hardware. Do not expect forward compatibility to be a long-term goal on both sides of the fence. Now, about that hardware then, what could we be looking at? And for now, I will only talk about the PS5, as that will likely be first to market, and what I expect to see tucked inside the little box. Now, size is important, no matter what some may say, and for electronics it is reverse of the norm. Smaller is better. The X and the Pro both came on the back of the die shrink the APUs sit on. This is the single chip that houses both the CPU and the GPU in one, known as a SoC, or a system on a chip. Providing a 43% reduction in size reduces power and thus heat through its TDP levels. This was the single biggest reason it could offer a 2x increase on GPU and a 31% boost to CPU clock speeds while staying within those vital wattage and thermodynamic levels. Now, AMD's roadmap gives us the view ahead, and within reason, 7nm is the next stop on that journey, a bigger and further reduction of almost 57% from the current Pro APU size. The plan is for this to land in 2019 alongside the new Zen 2 CPU and the Navi GPU architecture. As it is common, you tend not to design an entire new spec alongside your new fabrication partner changes, meaning the current Vega GPUs will likely be the first to hit this reduced footprint, cleaning the pipe, so to speak. Now, with this plan for mid-2019, this is our first clue as to the date we can expect the PS5 to land, i.e. 2020. Now, this is because being a pioneer would reduce the choice and benefit that Sony would have. Indeed, the likely plan will be for them to hold out when the fabrication model is refined and grab the best ROI of taking the short-lived Navi GPU design and the recent Zen 2 architecture into its new APU that will again have custom features added. The reason is twofold. One, they will strike a better deal from ordering established designs that will be approaching end of life when it launches, and two, the improvements and refinements to the process will increase yield rates, again enabling them to raise the safety margin limits that are factored into all chips. Zen 2 will have been on the market for almost a year at this point. This will have a roughly 20% increase in performance over Zen. Navi will itself have architectural increases that will improve over Vega. These will already be available as APUs, but of course, as we see now, still of a lower power performance level than what we will have inside these consoles. I expect them to be 8-core, 16-thread, with the possibility of a 4-core and 8-thread if the clock speeds and GPU increases are the best balance the teams find. Now, these could still be marketed as 8-thread CPUs, which would appease the PR teams at launch and many of the fans. Depending on the core count, we could see speeds of around 2.6 to possibly 3.5 or even slightly higher at best, which alongside the huge instructions per clock that Zen brings over the outgoing Jaguar would give developers far more choice within game worlds, from AI, physics, destruction and online functions, but this would merely be the start. Another benefit of increasing single-threaded performance would help teams that do not have the budget or the time to create asynchronous code that uses all the cores as often and as effective as possible, raising the base performance and features. Now, this is one feature that I feel will be the biggest leap we will see going into the next generation. Aside all the ray tracing talk, which is still quite a few years years away even from now, you will see benefits to things like ray trace shadows and AO, and maybe even reflections at certain points, but I doubt we're going to see a replacement for rasterization within this next leap of generational consoles. But we should see a big uplift in using those CPUs to benefit the world and the physicality of it much better, and that I'm greatly excited for. And with that said, most eyes will be on the GPU. As I said, do not expect the next gen GPU to land within the PS5. Although this is on the trend for 2020 by AMD, it may have some elements of it, as we saw with the rapid packed math from Vega being within the Pro. I tend to lean towards the fact it will be Navi and have a higher core count, somewhere in the region of 64 APUs and 12 to maybe 1500 MHz clock speeds, which will deliver around 10 to 12 teraflops of performance, which will exceed the 8 teraflop target that Sony has for true 4K, or 8K at 120 Hz target that its next VR will push for, 4K per eye. You see, consoles rely on a USP, a unique selling point, to make them attractive. Killer apps are only part of that. For Xbox, BC is that brand, and they have embraced it full on, and it's worked enough to push people to think about jumping ship or upgrading. For Sony, they currently have two. Its first-party content is unquestionable, no matter where you sit, and the investment they have within the worldwide studios is both commendable and a vital ingredient to their continued success. The other was introduced with the PS4, but could be as vital as the PS1 for the mainstream adoption of 3D graphics. PSVR will be integral to the PS5. It will be part of the initial design and will no longer require separate hardware, aside obviously the head-mounted display and the controllers to work. Launching with a base model that has no headset but supports the current PSVR headsets, I feel we will also have a VR pack that comes with a new headset and controllers. Likely with fingertip tracking, room tracking and head-mounted camera and tracking overall will make it even more accessible. Wireless would be perfect, but maybe a stretch too far at this point. The core aspect though will enable almost pro quality looking titles to be pushed to the headset in 4K at 90 or 120 Hz natively, and the CPU boost will also empower a wider selection of titles to push the medium on into a new generation. Now, although VR is still not mainstream, Sony are in this for the long run, and by factoring this into the design from the start, it will make the adoption wider and gain more attention. PS4 was proof of concept for VR as far as Sony go for me, and the PS5 will be when they go full in and make this a true USP for the brand. The final pieces will come from the RAM and storage methods. I expect hybrid design for storage using a NAND designed 128 or 250GB M2 type hard drive for dynamic content, and an older style 1TB drive for mass storage, offering the best mix of speed, space and cost. Memory will increase, but I still do not expect HBM2 to land in the machine, likely GDDR6, which is still part of AMD's memory controller design, and AMD have it for its APUs, as it makes the most sense again for speed, heat and cost. Nvidia used the Samsung chips for its 1080 Ti and will use the new 6 models inside its upcoming Volta GPUs. This will resolve one of the biggest hurdles the consoles have always suffered from, and APUs also suffer from: bandwidth. A 256-bit or a 384-bit bus, as we see inside the X, will offer 16 gigabits per second speeds and between 512 to 900 gigabytes per second. This type of increase will enable developers to get much more out of the CPU and GPU, along with them individually and in tandem via asynchronous workloads. Now, even going from Pro, this will be a huge 134% increase, or a monstrous 300% at its best hike, to the machine's bandwidth, which will be of great benefit for all. In addition, I also expect either 16 or likely 32 gigabytes to be appointed, simply because they will allow even reductions to onboard memory chips once Samsung produce larger nodes. Another benefit will be that they will be in mass production way before needed, and at 1.35 volts use much less power for higher throughputs than the current GDDR5 in the consoles, and even GDDR5X being used in cards currently. All added together, we will have a machine that will have a CPU between 300 to 400% more powerful, A GPU 3 times more capable paired with roughly 4 times the memory and bandwidth, alongside faster storage speed and VR ready, that will play your entire PS4 catalogue as good or better than before. With the unlocked frame rate options and dynamic resolution scaling becoming more and more common, we can already see the signs of this becoming a known factor. Even if you are not an Xbox owner or a fan, you must thank them for making BC such a prominent feature that Sony simply cannot ignore now with its new machine. Now dates, well, like I say, 2020. September 2020 to be precise is my expectation for this. Why? Well, it will mark the 25th anniversary of the PlayStation brand and will be a perfect companion to the hype and media attention, alongside some special edition models. The benefit they have is they have a 2-year window for this, as back when the 5th generation launched, it still had 12-month staggered launches between Eastern and Western markets. The PS1 hit Japanese shelves in December 1994, so if push comes to shove, they still have anything between that and September the following year as a launch window, and for me, that is just too big an opportunity for the Big S to miss out on. $400 or $450 will still be the target price, and I also see many comments on how this is too cheap, etc. based on the hardware, and this is my last piece of info, and one that really should be well known by now, but it appears not so. RRP, or retail pricing, is nothing close to commercial cost of equipment. As a small example, you may see a CPU selling for $299 on Amazon or overclockers, but the cost price to the supplier will likely be upwards of 30% margin on that price, likely more on other items, and this is just one part in the retail chain. For Sony and Microsoft, they will manage their own direct deals at bulk discounts, pro forma methods, and set delivery schedules and payments up front. If we extrapolate a current Zen 1800X CPU as an example, you and I would pay around £260 or $300 for it. If Sony would pay something around 25% of that, maybe slightly conservative. When we talk about these devices, you must leave RRP at the door, and remember, these are subsidized units that are pre-purchased in the millions. As such, that sub £500 price tag, $500 price tag, is still within operating margins and enables another good leap over the current gen. If, like previous ones, these leaps will always reduce in impact, they will always still impress in high measure. Now, I hope you enjoyed this, and if so, maybe think about subscribing, share it, or even help me expand by my Patreon link below. Even $1 can help me expand my reach, improve my equipment, and much more. Now, I'm completely self-funded and independent, and that is simply why I say this. We can see how close my predictions are nearer the time, but for now, leave your thoughts below. Do you think I'm mad, bang on, or are you happy with 2020? Do you want it sooner, longer? Leave this and more below, and maybe some suggestions for future articles like this one. But until the next one, I bid you adieu.
PS4 Pro is not intended to blur the lines between console generations. Instead, the vision is to take the PS4 experience to extraordinary new levels.